Meeting of the Hillsborough Township Board of Education. In accordance with the state's Sunshine Law of New Jersey, adequate notice of this meeting of the Hillsborough Township Board of Education was provided on September 9, 2021 to the Hillsborough Beacon and the Courier News. Mr. Mahmood, may we have a roll call, please?
Surely. Mr. Gillette? Mr. Kidd?
Here.
Mr. Marini?
Present.
Thank you. Mrs. Maroon? Mrs. Nurse?
Here.
Mr. Oliver? Mr. Pulsifer?
Here.
Mrs. Stats?
Here.
And Mrs. Trujillo?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Mahmood. Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231 of the laws of 1975 provides that a public body may exclude the public from that portion of a meeting of which the public body discusses certain matters for which confidentiality is required as permitted in Section 7B of the Act. Resolved by the Board of Education of the Township of Hillsborough and the County of Somerset and State of New Jersey as follows. 1, the matters to be discussed are settlement agreements and a vendor contract negotiations. 2, the matters discussed in executive session shall be disclosed to the public when the need for confidentiality no longer exists. May we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Pulsifer.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marini. All in favor? Aye. We are now in executive session. We will be back here at 6:15 for school board training.
Yep.
Thank you. Good evening. We're back now from executive session. Mr. Mahmood, may we have a roll call, please?
Surely. Mr. Gillette? Mr. Kidd?
Here.
Mr. Marini?
Present.
Thank you. Mrs. Maroon? Mrs. Nurse?
Here.
Mr. Oliver? Mr. Pulsifer? Mrs. Stats?
Here.
And Ms. Trujillo?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Mahmood. And now we will turn the podium or mic over to Ms. Gwen Thornton from New Jersey School Boards Association, who will be conducting our board training today. Thank you, Ms. Thornton.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be back. One of the things that we didn't have an opportunity to complete at our retreat was the communications protocols or norms of communication. And so I'm here tonight to try to complete that process with you, and I think you will find it very helpful. I know that you are very concerned about both internal and external communications, and so we have put together a series of agreements that I think would be helpful for you all, and I thought it would be easiest just to go through them with you, and then we will customize them to reflect what it is that the Hillsborough Board of Education and Administration agree to. So these are suggestions in some instances, but it is a way of trying to quantify so that everyone is on the same page about how we're going to function and operate in terms of communications. Okay, questions? Okay, so we really begin with the board and superintendent communications, and a regular communication from the superintendent, whether it's an email delivered electronically. We used to receive them as Friday packets. Every Friday, but that was long before 2021. So I'm assuming that on some frequency, the board receives a communique from the superintendent detailing what goes on in the school. So how often does the board have that expectation, and what is reasonable in terms of the superintendent?
Oh, so actually, Dr. Antunes gives the board weekly communications through the communicator, and that's been an excellent mode of communication.
Believe me, I'm trying to hear, Jean, but I did not understand what you said.
She didn't hear.
Oh, so I was just saying that Dr. Antunes gives the board weekly communication via the communicator on email on Thursday or Friday of each week.
Okay, so on a weekly basis. So we would put in there weekly, right? Via email. Okay. What is the board's expectation around notification in terms of a school emergency, staff emergency? Oftentimes we hear from boards that they're out and about and they hear about something, there was an ambulance here, there was a police car they saw at a district. So what is the board's expectation, and then what is reasonable? Because obviously, if it were an emergent circumstance within a school, the superintendent's first responsibility is to address that emergent circumstance and do whatever is necessary to ensure the safety and security of the students, staff, and district prior to notifying the board. But at the same time, no one ever wants the board to be surprised. So I think it helps to talk about, what your expectations are in that regard, and then come to agreement around it so that there can be no misunderstandings around, well, I was here and, I was at Starbucks, I was at Wawa, wherever you are in town, and people are talking about it and we didn't know anything about it. So I think it's always helpful to just have that discussion, however briefly, around what the board expects, and then what is reasonable from the superintendent's perspective.
So in this particular case, I would say that thankfully we have not had emergencies. So, but in the past, what I remember is that the superintendent would send an email to the entire board. If it was like, for example, a bus situation, a bus breakdown. On other situations where it might be timely or emergent, the superintendent would call the board president and I believe the chair of whichever committee that would be most relevant to that.
So an example would be the cyber attack. When I found out, I immediately reached out to Jean. If she's unavailable, then I go to the vice president, and then down the list by seniority basically is what I would do. As soon as even if I don't know anything right away, that's sort of what and I find that with each, at least the time that I've been superintendent, with each board president, it could be a little different. Each of the communications could be a little different. Some board presidents want to talk every day, some want to talk every 3 days, some want to talk once a week, but that's a minimum. Oftentimes it's more than that. We'll text, we'll call, we'll talk, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But in terms of an emergent situation, depending upon what it is, it's either pretty quickly, even if I don't have all the information, or as soon as we gather some information in order to get it out there.
Okay, so would it be simpler to just notify the board president and have the board president
Absolutely.
notify the rest of the
Yes.
board?
It absolutely is more efficient also for our time because we're
That's
dealing
what I'm
with-
saying. You're dealing with an
Yes.
emergent situation. So is that agreeable to the board? So the superintendent notifies the board president, who will then reach out to the board members so that everyone is in the loop.
I
Freeing
think
up.
it might be important though, when the time allows, like after we hear from the board president, just maybe a follow-up email from the superintendent, just to make sure, because sometimes when you're playing, telephone, you don't want anybody to miss any imperative piece of information. So I understand how it could be very hard to do that in the middle of emergency, but after a few days or in a reasonable amount of time, a follow-up email from the superintendent, I think would be very helpful. That highlights what happened and how it was taken care of.
So if you're getting a weekly communication and it happens Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, you would have that on Thursday anyway, correct?
Thursday or Friday.
As a follow-up.
As
Right.
long as we could put that in there, yes.
But I'm assuming it would be, absent some extraordinary circumstance that I can't envision, but yes. Okay, all right. So is the board good with that? The board packets and supporting documentation go out how many days prior to a meeting?
Usually meetings are on Monday and they go out Friday afternoons. And we've tried to do it a little earlier, but we are working right up until that time, and sometimes even we'll adjust over the weekend if necessary, and then let the board know that.
Okay, so add-ons to the agenda or walk-ons are sent to the board ahead of time if you have them?
Yes, and if it's
Friday.
something, we always try to communicate if there's going to be a walk-on, or if we're aware of it, we always try to communicate that
Okay,
when we can.
and from the board perspective, that works? Yes.
I have a question. What about like documents that are related to something that the board may have to vote on?
I would think that they would be part of the attachment that would go out with the Friday information in the packet. That would be my expectation. If a board has to approve it and it's a public document, I would think that it should be attached as part of the Friday packet, just as a normal course of action.
And sometimes they're part of the committee
As informational
meetings.
to the board.
Often they're part of the committee meetings, so the board will have it as part of a committee meeting as well, whether it's education, communications, ops, whatever documents we might need for a board agenda are often discussed in the committee meetings prior to. the
Right,
board
but are
meeting.
they attached for the full board to be able to see it ahead
Yes,
of
in the minutes
meeting?
and stuff like that, yes.
Okay.
I do think, and just because I understand it's hard to get the agenda and documents out before Friday, but at the same time, then we have to also adjust the questions that may come in pertaining to that, because it's very hard to ask board members to look over that on a weekend, and then you're at work on Monday. So a lot of times, just if the superintendent is okay with getting, or I'm even getting those questions close to the board meeting on Monday, I think the reciprocity.
Okay, that's a
Needs
little
to be
further down,
noted.
but I mean, obviously that is a
Okay.
concern. And when you get it on Friday, I know it's the weekend and if you have activities planned and children and so forth, but they also, your administration also needs to have those questions ahead of the board meeting, because the first rule of effective governance is no surprises. So if you have a question, part of your responsibility as a board member is to make sure that administration is aware of that question. So if they need to pull together information or any kind of data, and indeed, if you have that question, it's possible that other board members may have that very same question. And by letting your administration know as soon as possible, even if it's over the weekend, that might be helpful too. I'm not saying you have to do it on the weekend, but if you get to it and read it, the longer lead time you can provide your administration, obviously, the more time they have to prepare for the board meetings. So, again, one member's request may trigger all board members to want to have that information. So that's very helpful for your administration to have it. And I would say that's part of the responsibility of board members. If you have questions on the agenda or on a committee report that's contained in the packet, your obligation as a board member is to notify either the committee chair and or the administration, so that if the committee chair can't answer it, address the question, doesn't have the information, then it gives the administration time to prepare before a public meeting, which makes it much easier at the public meetings.
We work really hard to try to anticipate the questions that may come up as we build the relationships with each individual board member. We try to anticipate, okay, what might Mrs. So-and-so ask or Mr. So-and-so ask, and then I try to address that in my weekly communications if possible. Sometimes I fall short, sometimes I'm right on, it just depends. But that's what we try to do, anticipate, because by the time we get here, it should run very smoothly because we've done all the background work.
Exactly.
So that's sort of what our goal is.
Well, but the board has a responsibility in helping you achieve that goal,
Absolutely.
right? And that is, if they have questions, they need to get them to you. So
Yes.
that you have sufficient time to put together either an answer, as in, I don't have time to put that together, that's not a reasonable expectation for tonight, or it'll be on a subsequent agenda or whatever the, information is, so that no one is surprised at a public board meeting by a request.
And this board has been responsive to, if we've gotten requests that, I'm sorry, that one is just, this is what it's going to take to put that together, and we just don't have time to do that, but we'll make sure we have it for next time or whatever the case may be.
Okay. And those reasonable requests, you have to keep in mind, should not involve lots of hours of administrative time just prior to a board meeting, or that are not part of your district goals, right? That take people off task. Your district goals are the focus for the work of the board and should drive the work of your committees. So questions that are off topic should not take hours and hours of administrative time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get a response, but unless the full board agrees, a majority of the board, that this is something that needs researched, looked into, investigated, no board question, individual board question should drive the work of the administration. The superintendent only acts at the direction of the majority of the Board of Education. So that's an important piece for board members to keep in mind, okay? Requests for additions to the agenda need to be received how many days ahead of the meeting?
So we usually meet, the administration meets a week before the board meeting, the week prior to the board meeting. And so anything that should be on the agenda usually comes out of committee meetings. We'll get it on the agenda. And then if there's something that comes up, if it's reasonable, we'll try to get it on, even if it's 3 days before, if it's reasonable. We'll always do our best to try to get it on. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So ideally, a week, but if I can get it on, then certainly we'll try to do that.
Okay. And the purpose of this is just to try to have everybody be on the same page.
Right, exactly.
It's not that this is etched in stone, but just to understand the processes and procedures you're going to operate by, so that if it doesn't get on and you've had an extraordinary week or lots of events that have transpired that need your attention, no one is going to be distressed that it did not get on in 3 days.
I remember in the communicator one time, you recommended as far as committee agenda, that the Wednesday before the week of any of those meetings, that we propose whatever items we would like on the agenda. And I think that's reasonable. So I've tried to follow that myself and encourage that with people in like the communications committee. So, and I like it because it's specific. The Wednesday before the week of the meeting.
Right.
The Wednesday before the week of the meeting?
Like, okay, next week we're going to have our committee meetings. So by, okay.
It's this week.
It's this week. I'm getting all my weeks mixed up.
If it were tomorrow, you'd want it the week
Right,
before.
okay. So by last Wednesday, if anybody wanted to suggest any additional items on the agenda or any items on the agenda, that's when they would
Would
submit.
have added it for tonight.
Well, I'm talking about
That would
committee
take place
meetings.
Oh,
tomorrow.
committee meeting. Okay.
Right, a committee meeting.
Okay. All right. And so typically then your board, when you have a question as a board member, you contact the chair of the committee? If you have a question on a committee report, or do you contact the administration?
Typically, what we're finding is that the board is contacting us, the administrators. Sometimes they contact the committee chair, which probably is the best way to do it first, sort of the chain of communication, committee chair, then us. Because the committee chair will then speak with the appropriate administrator if
Right.
he or she doesn't have the answer.
And so that is the process that most boards will follow, is the committee members, or non-committee members, I should say, if they have a question about the finance report and they're not on the finance committee or the facilities committee, or they're not on curriculum and instruction or your education committee, would call the chair of the committee to get a response.
Or email.
Or email,
And
not
copy
just,
me and the board president and that sort of thing.
yes, keep everybody in the loop, so that no one is surprised, to get those responses. And if the committee chair can't respond, then contact the administration, freeing up some administrative time to focus on other kinds of things. Because it may be a simple response.
Correct.
And that would be helpful, I think, just in terms of recognizing administration's work.
I gotta say, this is the first I've heard of this, because when I was, this is my third year, and when I was first on the board, I was instructed all communications should go to the superintendent and the board president.
Okay, I mean, boards that operate
before
with
me.
committees typically use their committee chairs effectively. And so by doing so, the committee chair may say, you know what, I don't have an answer for that. I wasn't at that meeting, or.
I'm
that's
okay
the
with
word-
that, I just
No, no.
want consistency. I just want to make sure we all follow.
Superintendents do it a little bit differently too, is what I'm thinking.
So
So that.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so is that what you prefer? Like we contact, if it's something directly from a committee report or whatever, if we have questions, we should contact the committee person and CC you and
I
the
think
board
the
president?
copying is a good way to go, because
Okay.
then we're aware, which you do.
But I usually don't contact the committee chairperson, though. I
Right.
usually just contact you
Okay.
and Mr. Hill.
So I think that gives everybody the fair chance to answer those questions.
So is that acceptable to the board members? So you'll contact the chair of the committee and copy the superintendent so that, or business administrator, I don't know.
The board
I mean, if it's a
president.
finance question, Eamon should be copied, right? Because in all
absolutely.
likelihood, he's going to answer it, not you. But so that everyone is in the loop. And hopefully that will free up some administrative time and be consistent across the board so that you know who to go to if you have a particular question. Okay? All right. So who do you have to request from to have an item added to your agenda? Let me ask the new board members. Do you know?
For the meeting or for the committee meeting?
If you want an item on an agenda for either a committee meeting or a board meeting, who would you go to?
I would assume you would go to the committee chair for something there and probably Jean for this.
Absolutely. So requests for items to be added to the agenda at a board meeting, they obviously should run through committees. Typically, if there's an item under new business that pops up that hasn't been discussed heretofore, typically the board president is going to refer it to the appropriate committee before it gets board action, okay? The process when you operate by committees is that topics and or items of concern, things you want to be addressed, need to run through committee before they come before the full board, right? Committees have no independent authority to bind the board. They can recommend or not recommend, but your minutes should include those things that are recommended as well as topics that were discussed and perhaps things that were not recommended to move forward. And then at that point, when you discuss it, a board member could ask that it be added to the board agenda for action. And that would allow the full board then to discuss it. Okay, is that okay? Again, the board president typically meets with the superintendent to approve the draft agenda. Sometimes that's done by email, sometimes it's done in person.
Typically, if there's a question about the board agenda, then I get a call, usually from Jean.
Because typically, the administration puts together the agenda around district items, but if the board has something that they want, then Jean would get in touch with the superintendent, and that item could be added to the agenda. So either reaching out to your committee chair and or Jean will allow you to make that work. Okay, we're good with that? And then you use a consent agenda, right? Yes, you already do that, so we don't have to talk about that. How about when a board member wants an item pulled from the consent agenda?
We talk about it here and we vote.
And then it's voted on separately?
Mhm.
Okay, and everyone's comfortable with that? Okay. In terms of meeting preparation agreements, obviously it's the responsibility of the board to come prepared, and you will need to keep your superintendent informed about comments from community members about districts or specific agenda items. If there's something going on in your community and you're hearing about it in the community, it is always important to let your superintendent know that ahead of time. Again, you don't want to come to a board meeting and see 300 people that you didn't know were coming to the board meeting when you live in the community, and sometimes you hear those things. So if you hear them, you ought to let your superintendent know so that they can be prepared for that, okay? I'm assuming that your meeting agendas are available to the public?
Yes.
Generally, they're back there, right?
Yes.
Even though they're available online as well, right?
Online, and it's also the Friday before.
The Friday
Typically.
before,
Mhm.
right? Okay. And procedures for public comment are clear and available at your meeting site.
Yes.
So if someone picks up the agenda, it's laid out on your agenda as well? Perfect.
Yes, it's listed out here.
Okay, great. So the board president follows the policy on public comment. Again, what's important, particularly now, I think, is consistency in your approach to that policy to ensure equitable time for every member of the public to be heard and to be respectful of the public and their perspectives. Typically, the board president, you have policy that says the board president is the spokesperson on behalf of the board, and that's typical of every district that I know of across the state. And if there are questions of fact or educational information, either your superintendent or your business administrator may respond to those comments. But it is clear that public comment is not meant to be dialogue with the public. Public comments are their opportunity to weigh in on what you're doing and to give you their perspective, but they are not meant as an opportunity to have a back and forth with Board of Education members, okay? Yes,
I just want to, could you please emphasize that public comment is definitely not meant to be a question and answer session. And that's common practice through all.
that is common practice.
With
The
all,
meeting-
with all boards of
with
education,
all
at least
boards-
in New Jersey.
In New Jersey. I can't speak to the whole country, but in New Jersey, that is the practice. Board meetings are meetings of the board in public, and it is the public's right to observe and comment on your deliberations and the business that you are conducting within your district. But it is not meant to be a question and answer. It is not meant to be a dialogue between individual board members or even the board president and the public. It is meant to give the public an opportunity to weigh in on the board's business and what you are doing. But it is not, again, it is not a dialogue. It is a meeting of the board in public, not a meeting with the public. Those are two entirely separate things. It is a meeting for you all to conduct the business that you're legally required to conduct and carry out those responsibilities that you have to carry out, and to hear public comment on those duties and responsibilities.
Are there times where there would be a kind of urgency to maybe answer any questions?
It really depends on the circumstance. Again, I think, consistency is critically important. And so if you do it one time, there's going to be an expectation that you continue to do that. So unless it's an exceedingly unusual, rare, emergent circumstance, 4 roofs have blown off the building. Hurricane Ida is my perfect example, right? Lots of schools ran into difficulty, had to call emergency meetings to figure out how they were going to manage the students coming in because it was so close to the opening of the school year. So, in that circumstance, I could see where perhaps the superintendent might wish to convey more additional information to the public that they might not have had access to because it sort of occurred midweek, right before Labor Day holiday. And so I can see a superintendent conveying that kind of information. But again, that is not a question and answer. That's not a dialogue. That's the superintendent giving a report, which I think is critically important to share information. I'm not suggesting that you're not sharing information. I think you can always share information, but you need to understand that that's different. And oftentimes people, when they come, want to have a dialogue. And I think boards need to provide those opportunities for either town hall meetings around topics, coffee and donuts with the superintendent. Emails are fine, but again, I think that just as children learn better in person, I think people communicate more effectively in person than they do in emails. And so I think having opportunities for the board and the community to have that dialogue is a critically important piece. It needs to be well structured. It needs to be around a particular topic or subject, not free flowing, because oftentimes it can turn into it can become more negative than positive and affirming. And I think, especially in Hillsborough and other districts that are doing great work, you want to celebrate that and you want people to be aware of that. So I think you want to focus on the more positive. That doesn't mean I don't think you can discuss, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think you can. But I think it has to be structured so that everyone's voice is heard and no one dominates a particular conversation, or it's not just one perspective on a particular topic.
So, but now there are times where people don't necessarily ask a question, but sometimes they say things that might be incorrect. So I would think that's appropriate to correct that.
If you have a full and accurate response that you can give, then certainly the superintendent can respond to something that's inaccurate or incorrect. However, if someone asks a very detailed question that the superintendent has not had time to research, because sometimes they do, it's far better to let the public know that you're going to get back to them with a response, especially if it's a individual parent's personal question, on a child or on a particular circumstance or a particular event. But they need time to do that research and pull together that information. And rather than convey inaccurate or incomplete information, I think it is far better to say to a member of the public, we will get back to you with a response, but we do need time to pull together that information. I don't have it at my fingertips. Sometimes parents look it up and say, well, how did the fourth grade this year do compared to the fourth grade last year? And no one has that kind of detailed academic assessments committed to memory, right? It's just impossible. So, that may be something that is presented at a later presentation, but, certainly that's something that can be responded to. But you don't want to just give an off-the-top answer and have it be incomplete or incorrect.
I don't mean questions like that. I mean people actually making statements that are incorrect. And sometimes there's a sense of urgency to address that before that incorrect information gets too far in the public.
Well,
I think there's been instances where I hope that I support that the superintendent or the board president has tried to correct that.
And I would think that's
appropriate.
And I think that's perfectly appropriate if it's a matter of fact as opposed to an opinion or someone's perspective. I don't think it's a valuable use of the board's time or the public's time to engage in a back and forth around an opinion or a perspective, because we're not always going to agree on every single issue. The board is based on 9 different voices, 9 different perspectives, and out of that comes more collective wisdom than an individual, right? But the public is here, again, to comment on how you're conducting business and what's on your agenda. But certainly, and hearing those perspectives gives you perspective, right? And understanding around what your community is thinking and talking about. But it is not a place to have that kind of dialogue. And I think that that's what's important to remember. And just being consistent in your approach to that is helpful. And I think once your public understands that that's how it works, right? It doesn't make them happy. They would like to be able to engage you. I remember those days clearly, but it's not helpful in the end, because you don't have the time to be able to conduct the board's business and answer every single question or have a dialogue with every single member of the public who has a comment. Okay? Questions about any of that? Okay. After the board meeting agreements, and I think this is an important one, once the board has voted and made a decision, the majority rule obviously carries the motion, whatever it is, on whatever topic. That doesn't mean you have to be a cheerleader for every decision the board makes. You might be on the other side of an issue and have a different perspective than the majority, but good boardsmanship and effective governance says that you support the decision of the board. So that's an important piece to remember, because you don't want to be undermining your own Board of Education. Because the next time you may be in the majority and not in the minority, right? It's going to shift depending upon what issues you're discussing and voting on. And that's a very important piece, okay? Maintaining the confidentiality of exec session is required by the Code of Ethics, but also making sure that all the documents and reports that you have that are confidential are maintained in that confidential nature. One of the things that sometimes, especially new folks want to do, new board members, is to go visit schools. I've never met a principal ever or a superintendent who wasn't proud of their schools or an individual schools. If you want to go see a school, that's perfectly okay, as long as you make arrangements through your central administration and set that up so you're not disrupting the educational process, and so it's not a surprise to the principal and or to anyone responsible for the security of that building, okay? Because you have no authority except when you are sitting at this duly advertised meeting of the board like you are tonight. So if you want to see it, and again, you know, if you've never been to a middle school or a high school class and you want to see those things, I would encourage you to set up a visit. Principals are generally delighted to have you come in and observe a class or two, as long as it's not in the middle of, testing or some other, something else going on in the building, and it's a little different with the COVID era. But I think it's important for you to know that as new board members, that you are welcome in the schools to visit, but you just have to set it up appropriately, because it takes about 10 seconds once you walk into a building for everyone to know you're there. You may laugh and think I'm being absurd, but I'm not. It goes like wildfire. So you want to make sure that you have set that up appropriately, okay? And teachers really are appreciative of your interest, so you don't have to worry about that. And principals are really happy to show you their buildings because they're justifiably proud of the buildings that they run and what goes on in their schools. So I think that's important to know, okay? So any other questions around any of that? And you're, of course, welcome, obviously, all the time at any public event at the school, science fairs, concerts, bands, football games. And I would encourage you, when you have an opportunity, to do that. The public is appreciative of seeing you. And I think it helps give us perspective to actually see what goes on in the schools and the outcomes to all their hard work, whether it's a science fair, an art show, a concert, a football game. All of those things are great efforts of your children, okay? Board and community communications. This is one of these things that's really critically important. Typically, if the board as a whole gets an email from a member of the public, how do you handle that? Jean?
You were saying with an email, so the email is responded to by me as the board president?
If it comes to you, a member of the public sends an email to the Board of Education, you're responsible as board president, what do you do with that email?
So then I would respond to the email and copy the entire board.
Okay. And copy your superintendent?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Well,
thank
sorry.
you. Superintendent
You're
and
giving me
the
heart
business
palpitations over here.
So I had forgotten, because our board alias goes automatically to all 9 board members, superintendent and the business administrator, so that's what I use.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And if it's a question that you can't answer or respond to, I'm assuming that you forward it to the superintendent for a response?
Yes,
And
that's
you
correct.
notify the board that the superintendent's going to be responding on behalf of the board,
Yes,
so that all board members know that the public is being responded to in a timely way.
And if I respond and it's to the full board, the whole board gets the response as well.
Okay.
Or Mr. Mahmood or any of us, that's what we'll do. Everybody will get it.
Okay. So that's important. That's important because you want to know that they're being communicated with. Okay? Any questions around any of this? I mean, it sounds like you all are pretty much on the same page in how you're responding and how you're operating. And I think that that's an important piece. If there's an emergency and the superintendent is out of the district.
I'm never out of the district, Gwen.
Well, that's depressing. They don't ever let you, they don't unlock the doors or let you out. No, I'm not.
Well, when the flooding happened, you were probably stuck here
There you
anyway.
go,
We were
right.
like an island.
You felt like you were floating that week? I know. My basement got just. Ugh.
No, only kidding, obviously, I'm not always kidding.
No, I know you're not. I know you're teasing, and I'm teasing back. Although you probably were floating last week, and you could have been an island, which is unfortunate. So typically, you leave the assistant superintendent in charge, and the board knows,
usually
or
Mr.
Eamon's in
Mahmood
charge,
or
so,
Dr. Feltry, yes.
right, so that you always know that there's
Yes.
someone to reach out to and contact.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So I think you seem like you're on the same page in terms of process and in terms of procedure. And that was my goal in coming tonight, was really just to make sure that everyone was on the same page and has the same level of expectations around how you're going to operate, so there can be no confusion around how that works. Questions that I can answer for you?
Actually, not a question, just something to add on, because I didn't want to interrupt you because you were flowing so well before. There was a section about when we're in a school building meeting with our children's teachers or something scenario like that. I just wanted to share something that was advice given to me when I first came on the board, that when you go into a building, you should assume that everybody thinks there's a flashing neon sign over your head that says board member. And you
Yep.
have to try very hard to make sure that when you're there for business of your children or something like that, that you go out of your way to make sure that you act and you separate those. Because people are just, teachers all know who was on the board. And when you walk into a building, they see a board member walk in, not a parent initially, and you may have to work at that. So it's something just to keep in mind to help separate when you have to be in a school for one of your children, as opposed to sometime when we're there as a board member, that, when you walk through that door, people see a board member, not a parent, as their first reaction.
Right. And Chris, that is a really good point for board members to remember. Think of Hester Prynne and the Scarlet A, only it's a big B for board member. And once you become a board member, they really do know you're a board member. So it is really important to say, if you're there to visit, I'm just here to observe a class because I'm interested, or I'm here because if someone asks you, if a teacher asks you, to be very clear why you're in the building and what you're doing in the building. And you're here as John's father, you're here as Mary's mother, and you're going to be working, doing whatever, volunteering or, for a concert or whatever. But typically you need to make sure you are very careful about that delineation between your role as a parent and your role as a board member, because you are always your child's first and best advocate. And that's an important piece to remember. No one's saying that that's not critical, because it is, but you just need to be very clear that you're there as so-and-so's parent or guardian on their behalf, as opposed to being, there on behalf of the board or as a board member. Okay? So, and that's important. Thank you, Chris, for that reminder.
I think, Gwen, it's important to note that oftentimes when a member of the public comes up and asks the board something, it's everybody wants to help, and everybody wants to try to give the public what they want, or that's one person in the public what they want. But I think that there are processes that have been in place for years that often get tweaked, but to have some confidence in the processes and say it's okay to not be able to do that we'll look into it. And then if we have to tweak the process, we'll tweak the process, but to remain committed to the process that it is.
Yeah, and
because the intent is always positive, but it doesn't make anybody look good when that.
No,
when that
and you
happens.
never, if you tried to respond to every
Yes.
comment and every parent that wanted something done immediately, no matter how admirable, no matter how much you may support the notion that they're positing, there's a process for that, and it needs to go to committee to be researched, if it's an educational issue, or to policy if it's a policy issue, or, to the finance committee if it's looking for funding for a new team or a new, curricular or a field trip. There's a process for all of that. And while we would like to be able to make every parent happy and every child, give them everything we could all the time, there are constraints that you have to operate within. And so adhering to that process helps your public to understand how you operate. And that's important because it builds credibility. If I go to the board and I let them know I'm concerned about this, I know they're going to take it under consideration, but I'm not going to get an answer tonight, right? I'm not, there's a process and it takes a little time to work through, but it's really important, particularly in certain areas, because, money's not falling from the heavens. So if it's agreeing to something new, as extraordinary as it might be in terms of student opportunity, like a STEM or STEAM experience, you might not ever be able to replicate that, right? Because it's not budgeted, or a policy. Policies are driven by law, and you can find your district in a horrible circumstance if you mistakenly change something dramatically without seeing how it's interconnected to every other policy that's related to it. So I think those processes do help build credibility with the public when they understand that there's a process and it has to be followed. There are always exceptions, but they're extraordinarily unusual and rare. And certainly, the two examples I just gave in the area of policy or finance that's not budgeted, I would never recommend those. ever, ever, ever. They need to follow a process and a procedure. And you have those in place, and you know that if it's, something you want to bring up on the agenda, or if you've gotten a notification, from a parent that they're concerned about something and they want it addressed, make sure that you let your administration know ahead of time. So while they may not have time to do all that research, they're not going to be surprised, right? You never want to surprise your administration with something that they don't know about. So that's where that, no surprise rule comes in. So if you get something from the public and perhaps, it just hasn't made it to the administrative level all the way, just make sure that you've apprised them of it so they're not surprised. Okay? Yes.
I just want to say, at the last board meeting, a parent made a really heartfelt, compelling appeal to us about an issue, and I was, in a way, I want to apologize because I sort of wanted to circumvent the whole process of policy and policy revisions and first and second readings, because I was so, like all of us, we want to make sure, especially for the sake of our students. But I knew better. But, so I apologize. I think I put administration on put them on a bad spot. And it's the procedure that lends the credibility to what our policies are. So it's important to follow procedure. I mean, for example, I believe it took years to finally allow like robotics and other similar clubs to get letters. And it's a perfectly wonderful attainment and valid, but for, and I think I was also concerned about the urgency, the time sensitive nature of it. But I think in order to make sure we have credibility, it's important to follow process. Anyway, I apologize for putting administration on the spot.
Here's the thing. I've never met a board member who didn't care about kids. And so when a parent comes and it's heartfelt and passionate about helping their kids, and I hope all parents are passionate about getting what their kids need for them, it's hard sometimes to sit here and say, we have a process, and yeah, it does take a little bit of time. And meanwhile, while we're taking that time, your child may not be getting what you think he or she needs to have. That's tough, right? I'm a parent and a grandparent. I know what it feels like. I was a board member, and I remember what that feels like. But sometimes, it really is important, and there's a reason for it. And most of it is around the legality of your policy and the interrelatedness of one policy to another, and it impacts, and it could create liability issues, because if you do it for one, then you have to do it for all, and what does that look like, and what is the cost? I mean, there's so many pieces to when you start, it might, because you said it was a child who wanted something, right? So, it becomes then, if you do it for one, you have to do it for all. What does that look like? How many kids does that involve? What are the costs? Can we sustain that? There are all those moving pieces that you can't possibly know from listening to one parent's impassioned plea. So it's hard, and I get that, and I commend you all for caring enough to want to do good things for kids. Better to be arguing about that or discussing that than some of the silly things that we spend a lot of time on. But I think process is important in that particular area. So, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, that is really what I came to say. I also included the annual calendar for you all, especially for the new board members. It lays it out by month, some of your responsibilities. And I think that's helpful for you to get a sense that there's a cycle to the board year and what happens in what month and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've struggled with on the communication side, we brought this up a couple times, is something, not this, but a calendar of when things are coming up, when there's been discussions on assessing coaches or hires or things like that we voted on, that we get to the point where we just have to approve stuff because we're running up to it. So I don't know if there's a standard practice across boards about setting these kind of calendars as a standard process. So we're doing these reviews.
Right, and that's one of the reasons that we give it to you, because it helps you as boards to plan your year. So when you look, for example, May 15th is the drop dead date for renewals and non-renewals, right? We know that's in the law. You have to do it by then. So you know that at least either your last meeting in April or your first meeting in May is going to have that on the agenda. That helps you to know that that's coming up, okay? The budget dates shift a little, but we know typically the preliminary gets approved somewhere late March or early April, and the final gets approved budget toward the middle of April. So those are kinds of dates that are included in there to help give you a sense of when things are happening month by month. And so when you look at your board calendar, in terms of the meetings, you're able to sort of plot out those things to know what's coming up. It's like the last page, right? And I think that's very helpful, especially for new board members to just get a sense of what's going on when. Because it takes almost a year to go through a whole year of board business before you get any sense that there's a cycle and a rhythm to this. You know, we do the superintendent eval, it has to be done by, July 1. We do a self-eval following that. We set, district and board goals, so that it's a continuous cycle of activities and you begin to understand that it moves in that direction. So, but if you have questions, please always email me, call me, any of you. That's what I spend my time doing, and I'm happy to talk and answer questions, and I will always get back to you on emails as well. So,
Is there an, sorry, you mind if I?
Go ahead.
Is there an opportunity to shift board goals to be calendar year, for example? So I know a lot of board members every year, there's 3 people going, 3 people coming in. Is there an opportunity, or is that a mandated thing that's done?
It's in statute.
So we can't do it in, okay.
No, originally boards were elected in April and reorganized in May, when they decided that if you stayed within the 2% tax cap levy, you could move your election, but part of that compromise, the public wouldn't have to vote on the budget. But as part of that compromise, it also moved the election to November with then reorganization in January. But that's the only change. So a third of your board runs for reelection every year on a 9-member board. So it varies from board to board depending on the number of seats, but that's the only.
I guess my point is a third of the board was not involved in setting those goals, and a third of the board is not going to see those goals through to fruition in theory if there's a replacement, which makes that an ineffective process.
I understand that, but the budget also starts July 1. And everything is off cycle. With the election in November and reorg in January, you actually get a whole 6 months, whereas when it used to be in May and you were elected to the board, you came in and you had missed like half a year's worth of stuff, right? So it's a little better, a little more in sync, but it's never going to be in sync, unless New Jersey changes its laws, which, anything's possible, but I'm not holding my breath. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but I understand that it's difficult. But, the U.S. Senate is like a third every year. So, it runs in those cycles. So.
Regarding the calendar, this is like a general calendar, I guess, for all boards, but we also have policies regarding certain things we should do by a certain time, such as, I believe, approving coaches and by a certain time. So I think we need to somehow come up with a way where we're following that procedure. I don't think this is the time to really address that. I just wanted to point that out, that if we could come up with a way to better able follow that policy.
I have some ideas about that. We can.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. As always, it's a pleasure to be here in Hillsborough. If you need anything, let me know how I can help. We're here to assist. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Gwen.
And a great school year. Crossing fingers,
Fingers
toes.
crossed.
Every joint we have, we're crossing, right?
Thank you very much, Gwen.
Okay, you're welcome.
May I now have a motion for a brief 15-minute recess before we begin again at 7:30?
So move.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we will be back at 7:30. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome again to the Monday, September 13th, 2021 meeting of the Hillsborough Township Board of Education. We are back now from board training. Mr. Mahmood, may we please have a roll call, please?
Surely. Mr. Gillette?
Here, present.
Thank you. Mr. Kidd?
Here.
Mr. Marini?
Present here.
Mr. Maroon? Mrs. Nurse?
Here.
Mr. Oliver? Mr. Pulsifer?
Here.
Mrs. Stats?
Here.
And Ms. Trujillo?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Mahmood. I would like to now, may we please now all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to now acknowledge the correspondence received as listed, and to also inform my fellow board members that I have responded to the emails that we have received as of Friday, this last week. And now we're actually going to move the agenda around a little bit. We will now open it up to comments from the public on items on the action agenda only. So please remember that this is the board's meeting where we conduct the board's business in public, and we very much welcome public input. During board meetings, there will be 2 30-minute periods of time that the meeting will be open for public comment, where members of the public are invited to comment. During the first public comment period, members of the public may comment about items that are listed on tonight's agenda before the board votes. During the second public comment period, members of the public may comment on any school or school district issue that a member of the public feels may be of concern to the residents of the school district as per bylaw 167. Before you state your comment, you will be asked to provide your name and address. Please understand that our public forums are not structured as question and answer sessions, but rather are offered as opportunities to share your thoughts with the board. In instances where the board believes that there is a misunderstanding or inaccuracy, the board president or superintendent will address the comment. There may be times when a member of the public makes a comment or asks a question about personnel or hiring decisions. Kindly note that the Open Public Meetings Act and the privacy rights of public employees encompassed therein do not permit the board to discuss personnel issues in public session. Also, if you would, please spell your name for the record. Public comment period is now open for items on the action agenda only. Seeing none, I will now close public comment and turn it over to the superintendent for the board on any items on the action agenda.
I am requesting that item 11.
We're actually removing that item for this evening. We're removing that item this evening.
Any other comments from the board? Mr. Kidd.
I just wanted to quickly ask, since I'm a student at TCNJ, should I abstain?
I don't think you need to do that, Mr. Kidd. It's for the articulation agreement with TCNJ.
You're good.
All right.
Any other comments from the board? All right, Dr. Antunes, I'll turn it over to you for the action agenda.
Thank you. The superintendent recommends that the Board of Education approve the entire agenda. I'll go through it. The education agenda 10.1 to 10.4 as follows. Motion to approve the articulation agreement with the College of New Jersey Professional Development Schools Network. Motion to approve curriculum writing. Motion to approve policies and regulations for second reading. And motion to affirm the superintendent's HIB determination for the attached cases. The superintendent recommends that the Board of Education approve the human resources agenda 11.1 to 11.18 minus 11.15. We are removing 11.15 from the agenda this evening. So motion to approve the resolution as listed, motion to approve the retirements, and I'd like to note that Nancy DeTore was with us for 29 years to our students and staff on her retirement. Motion to rescind the appointment as listed, as well as to approve revised employment contracts and coaching contracts. Motion to approve revised lunch aid hours. Motion to approve a contract change is listed, as well as a transfer and change in assignment. Motion to approve leaves of absence. Motion to approve appointments. Motion to affirm the appointments as listed. Motion to approve sixth period coverage and group changes. Motion to approve. This one's okay. Motion to approve unaffiliated staff salaries 2122. We are removing 11.15. Motion to approve extended school year program staff as well as the summer work as listed. Motion to approve policies and regulations for second reading. Superintendent also recommends that the Board of Education approve the operations agenda 12.1 to 12.5. Motion to accept donations as listed, and we thank everybody for those donations. Motion to approve policies and regulations for second reading as listed. Motion to approve a settlement agreement kept on file in the superintendent's office, as well as another settlement agreement as listed. Motion to approve the 2021-2022 district and board goals.
Thank you, Dr. Antunes. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marini.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Stats. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Mahmood, may we have a roll call, please?
Surely. Mr. Gillette?
Yes.
Mr. Kidd?
Yes.
Mr. Marini?
Yes.
Mrs. Nurse?
Yes.
Mr. Pulsifer?
Yes.
Mrs. Stats?
Yes.
Mrs. Trujillo?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Mahmood. I will now turn it back over to the superintendent for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that Saturday, September 11th, commemorated the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on our nation. Please join us for a moment of silence to honor and remember those who lost their lives, for their families and loved ones, and for all dedicated first responders who risked their own lives to save so many. Thank you. I'd also like to just share tonight that right before maybe an hour before we started the meeting, we received confirmation that tonight's board meeting is indeed being live streamed. So we will continue to live stream the meetings for the foreseeable future, and we'll make sure that we include that in our notice moving forward. Today was our third day of school. And on behalf of the Board of Education, Administration, and staff, I'm delighted to share that despite Hurricane Ida and our typical start of the school year hiccups, we safely and happily welcomed back over 7,200 students to school on September 9th. As so many residents of Hillsborough and the surrounding area continue the cleanup and recovery from the aftermath of the hurricane, please keep them in your thoughts. The outpouring of support has been amazing, as it always is from our community. We always come together in times of need. This was seen hugely on Saturday, September 11th, when the Board of Education collaborated with the Hillsborough Education Association and Hillsborough Principals and Supervisors Association to stuff the bus at the Hillsborough ShopRite. The community donated school supplies and food pantry items to be distributed by the Township Social Services Department. If you or someone you know is in need of supplies or food, I encourage you to contact your school nurse or school counselor, who can provide you with additional confidential contact information. Just a few quick reminders. If you've not already done so, please complete the Pride Survey consent and the Marking Period 1 health affirmation that can be accessed through the Genesis Parent Portal. You should have received a school messenger reminder earlier today if you have not completed these two items. I would also like to remind parents that you should have received a school messenger from Dr. Feltry today, reminding parents that students will be participating in Start Strong assessments. These are state assessments and will provide information to be used as standards-based complement to the resources used by teachers in their classrooms to evaluate the needs of students. These assessments do not replace the New Jersey Student Learning Assessments that will be administered in the spring. For parents who have requested transportation changes, please be patient as the Transportation Department reviews and adjusts as necessary. There are hundreds of requests, and for the safety of our students, all route changes must go through multiple levels of approval before moving forward. And then finally, just a reminder that schools are closed this Thursday, September 16th, in honor of the holiday. That is it. Mrs. Trujillo?
Thank you very much, Dr. Antunes. Now we will move to committee reports. Ms. Stats, if you would give the Alliance report.
Hi, I just want to reemphasize that the Municipal Alliance addresses substance abuse awareness and education. We met on Friday, September 10th, and we talked about all the programs that will be implemented in the upcoming school year. Some of them will be virtual and some will be in person. Most of them are what we usually do. And yet again, I'm going to talk about the one program, not based in the schools, called Bridge to Success. I think we're really good at how we assist our students while they're in school. But a few years ago, a member of the Municipal Alliance realized that it's our young adults, once they graduate, experience struggles, some to the point where they might overdose. I've had former students where they experience that, and we want to try to keep that from happening. So we have a program called the Bridge to Success. It's an 8-week program it's 1 hour a week for young adults ages 18 to 24. They're virtual meetings and they're free. And it's to help them deal with stress. It's open to anybody in that age group, no matter what their issues are. They don't have to have some sort of substance abuse problem. We want to tackle that before it gets to that point. So how they can deal with stress, certain strategies they can use. Just a couple of examples, how to problem solve, using effective communication, being assertive without being passive or aggressive, and how to say no, relaxation techniques. And there's flyers on the table by the door in the front here. And you can also, there's a QR code to register, but you can also take a flyer that has registration information as well as more details about the program. And it will be starting September 21st. Thank you, Ms. Trio.
Thank you, Ms. Stats. Also, I wanted to just take a moment to address the audience. Thank you so much to those who are wearing your masks per the governor's executive order. To the gentleman to my right, if you would please put your masks on per the governor's order. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'd like to now turn to Mr. Gillette for the Operations Committee report.
All right, I'm going to lean over a bit here. Thank you. Operations met on August 10th, so this is a little bit out of date. I apologize, it was not at the previous meeting. Mr. DeLuca was present at the meeting to give us an update on all of the referendum projects at all of the schools, as well as the paving and roof project at HES and a new project, which is the replacement of the boiler at HES. We also had Kathy Major from Sodexo come in to give us sort of a review of last year's food service in the district. She shared that Sodexo served nearly 1 million meals, almost 500,000 breakfasts and 500,000 lunches during the 2020-2021 school year. And she's got everything ready to go for this school year. I hope so. It started 3 days ago. Also, we discussed the policies which were up for first reading last time, second reading tonight, which we already voted on and passed. That's it. Shortest report ever.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillette. So now we need to do the approval of minutes. Thank you, Mr. Mahmood. So may I have a motion and a second to approve the executive session minutes from August 23rd?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marini.
Second.
Mr. Kidd, thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And then may I have a motion and a second to approve the public minutes from August 23rd, 2021?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Pulsifer.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marini. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Now we will turn to the second public comment period. And so before we do public comment, I would like to turn it open to the board first for any comments. Seeing none, then I will now turn it over to the public. The previous statement still stands. And again, reminder, if you could please spell your name for the record for the minute takers. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Susan Anderson, Anderson, Case Drive in Hillsborough. I'm here tonight. I, along with thousands of other parents and taxpayers across the nation, have been very concerned about critical race theory and other similar ideologies being brought into our public schools. In May, I began asking questions of the administration about critical race theory and other similar ideologies being brought into our curriculum. And I got a confirmation back in May that yes, critical race theory and the 1619 Project or components of them are used in an elective in the high school called Race in the United States and in U.S. History 1. I started to do some homework and pulled up the curriculum and the resources and the bibliography to that elective course, Race in the United States. In the beginning of the course, the unit talks about, let me just get my notes here. It talks about, requires respectful behavior from all participants, and it states that no one has all the answers and everyone can benefit from hearing other perspectives. And I fully agree with that. However, when you dig deep into the course and you start looking at those resources and those bibliographies, there is a glaring and obvious lack of balance in materials. Almost all of the materials, I'd say 95% of them, are coming from the progressive left. There is no balance, and when I began to write back and forth to the administration to ask questions about that, and on June 9th, I wrote a very detailed email to the administration asking for very specific questions on certain parts of this elective, how it was written, how it got through scrutiny, how it passed all levels of approval without anybody saying, wait a minute, we talk about looking for balance and perspective. There's none here. There's none at all. I still don't have answers. I've been writing multiple times. My last email to the administration went out on August 3rd. It's now well over a month, and that has been completely ignored and disregarded. It's the second time an email of mine has not been answered. I think no matter what side of this issue we're on, we can all agree that respect and open dialogue and professionalism should be required of all of us, me and of the district. I'm not seeing that on the other end. Parents, I just want you to know, my children are grown. I don't have kids in school. I'm a taxpayer and a stakeholder, but I'm concerned. You should be too. If you look deep into the curriculum, especially social studies and math curriculums, you're going to see terms used like overt oppression, dominant culture, whiteness, privilege, white fragility, defunding the police. Now, some of you may think there's no problem with discussing those topics, but even if you think that's fine, I think we can all agree that these children are entitled to a balance in the resources used and the bibliographies used. We want our children being taught critical thinking. We don't want these children to be taught what to think. We want them to learn how to think. And I have serious questions as to whether the district is meeting those standards in these particular courses we're talking about. So parents, I would urge you to, at all grade levels, I would urge you to start looking at curriculum, talk to your kids, see what's coming home from school, look at the resources, look at the bibliographies, look at the course itself, how it was written, who approved it, what are they learning, and how are they learning it. You might be quite surprised as I was. And Dr. Antunes, I will be following with you later this week. We need to have a discussion on your administration, your staff, and the lack of respect I'm getting in not getting answers. It is very unprofessional, it is unacceptable, and it needs to be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Excuse me, before you begin, to the gentleman waiting in line again, if you would please have your masks, as Dr. Antunes had elaborated in her email to the community, properly fitted over your nose, mouth. We'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, Tim Jordan, 201 Brokaw Court, JORDAN.
That was pretty damn good, Sue. That was good stuff, right? Okay, whatever letters you want to call this nonsense, critical race theory, or whatever letters you want to describe or hide behind, okay, it is racism. We are teaching racism when you're teaching this critical race theory, okay? And it's fueling the flames, okay? As I said before, last time I was here, racism in this country should be on life support, but it's because of organizations that are fueling it and supporting it and building it and increasing it and supporting it, okay? That's not the direction we want to go in. I'd like to know how this got on the curriculum. My first question, how this got on the curriculum? Was there a committee?
Mr. Jordan, as I said earlier, this is not a
Okay,
question and answer session.
I'll put the question out there. Next time we have a meeting, I'd like to have that answer. How did this get in the curriculum? Was there a committee? Some 4 people, 3 people, 2 people, 1 people, whatever it is, okay? That's the question I'd like to have answered. Okay, who? The other question is why? When we need scientists, we need engineers, we need STEM programs. Okay, last meeting, you guys did away with a teaching position here, and we're replacing it with this nonsense, okay? This is what we need in the school system. As Sue said, we don't need you guys to teach them, what to think. We need to teach them how to think, okay? I'd like to know on this board right now who supports critical race theory. If you could stand up in the board, who supports critical race theory at this board right now? If you could stand up, if you support critical race theory, if you could please stand up so I can see how many people we're dealing with. So nobody supports this, but now we're teaching it to our kids? Is that right? Am I wrong to assume that? Okay. As Sue said, parents need to get up to come to these meetings. We need to get this out of the curriculum, okay? We need to get rid of this racism that's being taught, okay? My question is, if there was a group, if there was a committee, I'm sure there was a committee. I've been to enough of these meetings over the years, although I haven't been to many recently. I used to come to these meetings and that was just me and the photographer and you guys. That was it. So I need to find out how this got into the curriculum. It's very important to me, okay? So parents need to get out and stop this nonsense, okay?
Is this time up? Mr. Jordan, I've been informed that your 3 minutes is up.
No, I'm not done yet. How many people?
Excuse me, Mr. Jordan.
How many people do I need to bring here?
Excuse me, Mr.
Now,
Jordan.
You delayed me when I came up here. You
Mr.
reprimanded
Jordan,
some person when I came up here.
You were timed.
So I just want to ask one more question.
Jordan.
How many people do I need to bring here to stop this nonsense?
Mr. Jordan.
I don't want my tax dollars wasted on this nonsense. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Jordan. 1 minute. Go ahead.
Frank Chupinka, Chupinka, lifelong Hillsborough resident. Just like to say before I start, my daughter had 2 great years at Amsterdam School. 2 of her teachers are back there. Helped her through some learning issues. I can't say enough about the job that they did. Unfortunately, in the past 2 years, the past 18 months, my faith in the school system or the Hillsborough Board of Education has been shaken. I heard things in homeschooling being taught to my kindergarten son that I felt were inappropriate for his age. And I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't hear it from my own ears. The fact that I had a kindergartner stuck in front of a computer, we went through, thank God we have the resources to provide extra teachers to come over and help him with these studies. People who are financially incapable of doing such things, they must have been through heck last year. It's caused medical issues with my son, the stress. That's real. This is a real thing. There's a lot of divisiveness going in right now. I'm not going to hit all the topics that everybody wants to get enraged over. I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot of division that's going on, not only in our country, but in our schools, and it's completely unacceptable. And we have an opportunity to stop this now. The common denominator that we all have for these kids is our love for them. You know, what's it going to be like if we don't turn the tide now? What are we going to look at in the future if we all can't just say, look, school is for school, you know? Let's make our kids better. Let's do better for our kids. Let's do better as adults. You know, we could all step up and have a part in this. And we could all step up and be accountable. We owe it to these kids to do the best, to put all this stuff down and focus on what's best for them, and that's their education, their health, and their happiness so they could grow up to be productive adults. As of right now, I've lost the faith in the Hillsborough education system. The information we have received over the past 18 months has been contradictory and, in my opinion, politically divisive. My wife and I are very discouraged by how the district is currently being run, that we made the financially painful decision to remove our children from this district and send them to private school. Once again, we have the means to be able to do this. I think a lot of what's going on is affecting people more harshly with less means than us. If we're feeling this, I can imagine how it trickles down the line to other families. We're able to do and make the next right move. Just want everybody to just realize, you know, we have an opportunity. And if it doesn't stop soon, it's only going to get worse. So let's just figure it out. Thank you very much for your time.
I'll put my mask back up after I'm done speaking. My name is,
Excuse me?
I can't speak with my
me.
mask up.
We're all wearing masks per the governor's
There you
executive
go.
order. Thank you.
My name is Kyle Newell. I've been a lifelong resident of Hillsborough. I've actually been here 30 years, so I wasn't born here. I have 3 young children, and as the gentleman in front of me said, we made the decision for my kindergartner not to come to school here. For the reasons they said, we're sending them to a private school, money out of pocket. What I would like to bring up tonight is what science are you guys following as far as making the mask mandatory in school? And if you say you're following the governor, that means you're following the health commissioner and the governor that had the worst per capita death rate in the country with their policies, people that put seniors back in the nursing homes. So if that's the science you're following, that's not leadership. Leadership is not just blindly following authority. So I want to know what science you're following that, because today I was able to find 7 studies very quickly showing that masks are detrimental psychologically and physiologically. Breathing in carbon dioxide all day, increasing bacterial pneumonia. How are kids supposed to learn? This is child abuse. If you don't think this is child abuse, having a kid wear this all day, you're not living in reality. I'm out in town. A lot of people know me. There's way more than 50% of the parents that don't want their kids in masks. And if you're not listening to that, you're not listening to the people. You guys work for us. I'm sure you all mean well, but you all work for us. You got to remember that. And it's got to be a fair game. Our side is refused to be heard. We would have maybe sent our son to school here if it was optional. I have at least 4 families, close friends, that have chosen, as the gentleman before me said, to send their kids out of district. I never thought I would have to send my kids out of district. I have 3 brothers, all 4 of us went through the school systems here, grade school system. Next meeting, I want to see the science that you're following with the masks. I want it in hand. I want to see proof. I'll bring proof. I have proof. You guys, you have to hear both sides of the argument here. And I expect more from everybody on the board to be transparent and show us where you're coming up with the science. You guys are leaders in the community. You're not followers, you're leaders. And we need you to remember that. Thank you.
My name is Janine Basin. I reside on Valley Road. Last name is Bason. I was not going to talk about this, but since the question was asked, the science behind the masks is really the $1,906,108 that Hillsborough Township received for adhering to the governor's erroneous mask mandates. That's why we have to wear them. There's no science behind it. That's not what I came up here to talk about. What I came up here to talk about was that I have asked on more than one occasion if critical race theory was being taught in our schools, and I can't seem to get a concise answer. Calling critical race theory by another name, in this case, Race in America, does not change the values and ideas that are being taught. Some may argue these ideas are valuable and bring acceptance and awareness. Others, like myself and many in this community and many that are here tonight, feel that this ideology actually enhances our differences and teaches our children that if they are not white, they are not accepted, they are not good enough, and they are not valuable enough. Is this what we want to be teaching? This theory was designed to be discussed by scholars in colleges and universities, not taught to our 14 and 15-year-old children, and in some instances, even younger. I did spend some time reviewing the topics covered in the curriculum that was approved in August of 2020. Just to bring to light, Unit 2, do American citizens owe patriotism to the country? Coming off the 20th anniversary of September 11th, I cannot believe this is even considered to be addressed in our schools. Should we be patriotic? Is that even a topic that we're willing to discuss? This unit also covers, and here's the key, the differences in each other. We are literally teaching our children to look at others differently. We are teaching racism. Children do not inherently see differences until we as adults teach them to. Go to a park at any time and you will see children of all colors playing together. That's what we should be focusing on. Unit 4 covers these key terms: whiteness, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and these exact words, critical race theory. Unit 5 talks about defunding the police. And I even looked into some of the reference materials. The 1619 Project is a writing that falsifies the historical purpose of the Revolutionary War. Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, that claims that rioting is not only okay, but one of the best avenues for change, and that peaceful protesting is ineffective. I have also heard that teachers in our own district are allowed to have BLM flags in their classroom, and that teachers are not required to and do not enforce standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like some clarification on what political or racial items are permitted in the classroom.
You would just finish up?
Yeah, absolutely. Unity and togetherness in our schools and community is what we should be striving for. Instead, we are accepting and teaching philosophies that instruct our children to focus on differences and tell them if they are not white, they will not succeed. I am asking to please consider removing Race in America from our curriculum.
Whenever you're ready.
Jessica Easton, 5 Fernway. It's EASTON. I'm gonna take a crack at a smaller topic than the previous speakers, although I appreciate what they're saying. Also, I have written correspondence on this, and it wasn't noted, and I never received any response to multiple emails, so I'm here going to say it again. So I understand back to school night is virtual. I don't think we've been told about parent-teacher conferences yet. I just want to point out that Hillsborough has a 75% vaccination rate. Right now, based on the latest numbers, 99% of the people in this town are not sick. I would like to know why we can't have in-person events at the school, especially parent-teacher conferences. My child is going to a new school for the first time this year. I feel like I should have the opportunity to meet their teachers. There's no health reason why we should not be able to come under the protocols given and have these meetings. And I just feel like we need to start moving forward at some point. I mean, you can't keep us locked out forever. I just don't, I'm not sure I understand that. So that's it. Thank you.
My name is Kiruthanavelu. My 2 kids are going to elementary school. I can't imagine my kids wearing masks for 6 hours. When I go for shopping, after 2 hours, I have to remove my mask. I can't stay. So with that said, kids wearing masks for 6 hours is something unimaginable unless for the sake of wearing mask if they are wearing, and maybe like there is a loose regulations inside the school that I can't see. So with that said, I have two questions, right? If I pull my kids from the public school for now and put them into a private home school or private school, when they get vaccinated, or if you offer a virtual learning option, can I enroll them back into the public school without any issue, without downgrading their classes, as well as, without going through a lot of, hoops? Can I just seamlessly enroll them back into public school? That's my question one. I know I don't get answer now, but at least I want to get sometime later. If you have an answer, I want you to point me to documentation or rules where I can read about it so that I have a proof what you said is what I'm hearing. My second question is, as per my understanding, regarding the virtual learning option, what governor canceled is his own mandate. His own mandate, what he put in the past, he said everybody should offer a virtual learning. He canceled his own mandate. With that, that's my understanding. With that said, did he ban education board from offering a virtual learning, right? It should be an option. I'm not saying it should be the only option. It should be an option for parents and kids who has past medical history, who do not take much risk. Their risk appetite is low. So they should have an option just because of pandemic. Obviously, I don't want my kids to be at home. I want to be in school, meeting their friends, teachers, learning, but I cannot take much risk. With that said, did governor ban you, the education board, from offering a virtual learning, right? I was always told, oh, governor canceled his mandate. He canceled his own mandate. Did he ban you legally from offering? That's my question. With that said, thanks for your time.
Excuse me, before you go, would you please just spell your last name for the record?
Yeah, it's T as in Tom, H, A, N as in Nancy, G, A, V, E, L, U.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Henry Goodhue, Hillsborough Education Association, GOODHUE. I would like to just start by saying there seems to be some question as to what our members do, what our representatives do within the building. And for those that don't know, I represent close to 1,100 of the public school employees, proudly so. And I think over the last couple of days, we've really seen who our employees really are, and I include the board and the administration in that, even though the board is not employees because they're not paid. But over the last couple of days, we experienced one of the worst storms that we've ever seen in this area, right on the eve of reopening schools. And I am a Hillsborough parent myself. I share frustration that things are not the way that I feel they should be. But I recognize that things are going in the best possible direction they can to get my children in school and have them come home to me happy. So I do thank everyone who's put effort into that, especially as we looked at the fact that 3 of our school buildings were damaged in the storm, one incredibly so. And as I went around to see what was going on in each of the buildings, what I found is that our members, custodial, B and G, they had slept in buildings. They had stayed there for hours, some 36 hours, who couldn't get home to their own houses that were damaged, to their own families. They stayed there and they cleaned and they took care of these buildings so that our students could come in. So if there's any question as to who our members are, who anyone who works in these buildings are, it was on full display over the last couple of days. When I went to the middle school Friday morning to assist with the cleanup, there was not any hesitation on anyone's part. And anyone who's sitting at the dais knows I will take issue whenever I need to take issue. There is none to take here. I stood shoulder to shoulder with administration, custodial, B&G, teachers, instructional assistants, everyone, to clean up that building, to drag out trash, to remove things and make it clean for our students so that they could come back as fast as possible and have the best possible education they could. We made sure those people were fed so that they could stay there and keep doing it because they couldn't get home. Countless members lost their houses. We had numerous members who lived in Hillsborough, lived in Manville, lived in the surrounding areas. Homes were destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. And where were they on Thursday? They were in those classrooms teaching those kids. Where were they on Saturday? They were outside of ShopRite for 7 hours gathering supplies to support this community. We delivered 2 box trucks of supplies, school supplies and cleaning supplies, from the generosity of this community, from the amazing people in this community who saw what we were doing and came out to say, yes, we need to make sure that these kids are okay. We need to make sure these classrooms are safe. I recognize my time is up. I'll conclude by saying, again, as a parent, I thank everyone who put the work into that. I have never been more proud to represent the people who work in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goodhue.
Hello, my name is Leisha Gaber-Bayless, Gaberbaylis, live in Hillsborough. Just wanted to say, when I heard at the last meeting that we were eliminating 2 positions in the lower grades, I was disappointed. I was disappointed that no one mentioned, oh, why don't we try to use these teachers for extra pull-out classes or push-in classes for the low students or even the high students. And yes, I do mention high ability students because they deserve to be challenged too. Also, with regard to some of the other comments, I just wonder, also, if we were to remove that from the curriculum, what else would we take out from the curriculum? Would the Holocaust go away? I imagine that we teach about that. Just other things of that nature too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Gaber-Bayless. Is there any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I will now close public comments and call on the board, Mr. Gillette.
Thank you. I'd like to say something about masks, first of all. I also have my concerns about especially younger children in masks for a full school day. As some of you are aware, during the last school year, I was reluctant to put my support behind returning to a full school day while the mask mandate was still in place. Because I think it's really terrible for those younger children to be masked up for what could amount to an 8-hour day between the bus ride there and back. That's tough. I believe before the governor made his current mask mandate, and essentially taking the choice out of our hands, I believe we were heading towards a policy or a practice that would not be so open-ended as as the mandate the governor's just made. He essentially said, you have to be in masks until I say so, until I say you can take them off. That's tough. We were heading towards something, I believe we were anyway, that would take into account the amount of COVID infection, spread rate, whatever you want to call it, in our community or region. And when numbers improve, we would be able to take the masks off. I think something like that would be better. But I think there is a way to have masks on and also follow science and then be able to take them off when things improve. It's very frustrating to be up here and have to just comply with the governor's open-ended order like this. When I see those little kids, I've been up here a long time, and it breaks my heart to have to put those little kids in masks. Look, if they want to, if their parents want them to wear masks, fine. But that's tough. So, yeah, I don't know. That's all I have to say about masks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillette. Is there any other comment from the board? Oh, Ms. Stats.
I understand Mr. Gillette's concern about children wearing the mask, but they do get mask breaks. But even in spite of that, I do understand that it can be difficult for some children. But I wanted to mostly talk about what Mr. Goodhue said. It was some of what I heard, not just from Mr. Goodhue, but from others about how everyone has contributed. Hearing that our buildings and ground personnel were sleeping overnight, that's amazing. Whew. And all kinds of staff, administration, buildings and grounds, teachers, aides, and weren't necessarily just worrying about their own classrooms. They were helping, they knew other, like in the annex, teachers who don't teach in the annex were helping teachers, prepare their classrooms, those teachers that were in the annex. It's very heartwarming. And at ShopRite on Saturday, towards the end of the day, people were coming out saying the entire school supply section was wiped out. That sounds bad, but that's really a good sign that our community was so supportive. And I don't think they were ready to accept monetary donations, but there were a lot of people, very generous people that gave wonderful donations. So I applaud our community and every member of our staff for coming together after Hurricane Ida. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stats. Any other comments from the board? Mr. Gillette.
All right, let's go over to critical race theory for a second. I think it's, first of all, I think it's unfair to single out one high school elective class when we talk about this. It's a class, kids can take it as an elective. I think they can get something good out of it. If they put their mind to it, they can. But I think we use the term critical race theory as sort of a catch-all, at least in this district, for a lot of aspects of the diversity, equity, inclusion that we have to teach based on the state mandate, the social emotional learning. All of this stuff is infused with, there's so much of that crosses the line. And it's just terrible. It's divisive. It's rotten. So it's not one class. We have a social emotional learning website in the district, and if you look at the resources that are linked to that website, it's terrible. Don't single out that high school elective. Look at everything and look at how those mandates, how they go too far. And if we're going to cure this, I think the way to do it is probably to have some sort of a policy that just forbids us teaching any child that they have unconscious or subconscious bias, or that they are any less of a person based on the color of their skin. If we just make that policy, or some policy like that, if a policy that can sit alongside the state mandate for diversity, equity, inclusion studies, whatever, then that would be the way to go. Because I don't think it's so infused now. I don't know how we're going to get rid of it unless we just put our foot down and make a policy that no kid can be taught that they're less of a person because of the color of their skin. I mean, I thought that should be obvious. I'm not the oldest one here. There's people older than me that lived through this. We got through this decades ago. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Ms. Stats?
I'm concerned that people are really believing that children are being taught that they're less than what they truly are. They're not being taught that. Excuse me. They're not being.
Excuse me, Ms. Stats has the floor. The public comment is closed.
Our teachers they chose that profession because they love children. And our teachers chose their profession because they love children. Excuse me. So they would never want to have them feel that way. Having said that, though, there are uncomfortable topics. And it's also part of the job of an educator to provide a full education for the children and not avoid the uncomfortable topics, especially those that have been experienced by people that are unlike ourselves. I don't think we can dismiss the fact that racism still exists to a significant degree. Many of us don't experience it. Many of us don't witness it, but it still exists. And it's a serious issue for a lot of people that do experience it. And I think it's important for the education of our children I think it's important for the experience of our children to be taught all components of everything, not just racism, not just, like quadratic formula and all that stuff. This is a part of a complete education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stats. Is there this is not a conversation between the board and the public. Any other comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, I actually have a few things to address from public comment that I can. Mr. Thangavilla's comments about homeschooling. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Antunes, but I believe that you may pull your child from public school at any time to homeschool. When you re-enroll, the child will be tested. Welcome back, absolutely. And tested to determine proper placement? Okay. With respect to virtual learning, the governor's road back, or the Department of Education's road forward plan on page, early on in the document, specifies specifically that there will be full day, in person, like basically full time. And there is no option for virtual learning. So I hope that answers that question. And with respect to the other comments about critical race theory, I commented on that last time. I'm not prepared right now to talk further about it. I object to Mr. Gillette's comment that students are being taught that they're less of a person based on the color of their skin. I think that with respect to our board training that we had earlier today, perhaps that is something that we can invite school boards in to talk about students' achievement in the lens of hidden bias. Okay, so that's that. Then, are there any other comments from the board before I just have a concluding statement, which is unrelated to? Okay. So I appreciate that Mr. Goodhue came to the podium to share all of the amazing things that our staff has done, and I wanted to thank the HEA and HPSA for organizing this weekend Stuff the Bus collection drive and for inviting the Board of Education to participate. And so on behalf of the Board of Education, we're so grateful for the community's overwhelmingly generous support of our students and those families who were negatively impacted by Hurricane Ida. I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our district staff, all district staff, for the behind-the-scenes work planning this summer to ensure a successful September start to our schools. And I want to acknowledge and express the board's appreciation for those staff that volunteered their vacation time to contribute to this planning effort. It is greatly appreciated. I also want to thank the parents for supporting your children and for energizing a positive spirit in your tone and words. Our children look to us adults to know that we are working together to keep students and staff safe and healthy. So I thank parents for expressing your confidence in our public schools. I also want to thank the township for inviting the Board of Ed to march in the 250th anniversary parade, which is this Saturday, September 18th, which is the same route as the Memorial Day parade. And we look forward to seeing you in the community on Saturday. Thank you. Is there any other comment from the board? Seeing none, then I'll take a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Pulsifer. Second? Oh, thank you, Mr. Marini.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. We will see you in 2 weeks.